to my channel. I'm Deanna and you're watching ORCHID. I'm going to do a video introducing you to my jewel orchids today. So, massive disclaimer, but I am a total newbie to jewel orchids, and this entire collection was acquired in the last 6 weeks to 8 weeks. And can I say, I don't know why I waited so long, but because I am so new to them, I am really not in any position to give you guys advice or troubleshoot problems. I'm just going to give you some general care guides that I've researched. So more than anything, I really want you guys to correct me if I'm wrong, or, put your experiences down in the comment section below. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that overall these guys are doing pretty well for me at the moment, with the exception of the Ludisia discolor at the back there. That just arrived in terrible condition, and it really hasn't done very much since I got it, but it kind of looks like it's hanging in there, and it's sort of slowly losing leaves, but I don't know, it could look a whole lot worse. What I do think is that there is a vast lack of any really useful information or literature out there, and even articles or YouTube videos out there at the moment, the information is extremely general. So I want to share my journey as I grow these guys with you, and hopefully we can all learn a thing or two along the way. One of the best information sources I found is Here But Not, and that's run by Dustin. I think many of you guys will know him. He's got a YouTube channel and he's got a really informative blog as well. But I think his information is quite relatable because he's an orchid grower, plus he grows quite a few Anoectochilus. So I'll link his channel down below. He's got quite a few very well-grown jewel orchids, so it's kind of encouraging to see the progression of growth that he's had, which is something you also don't see on a lot of the YouTube channels. Now, I really think that jewel orchids are pretty underrated. I think that for a lot of orchid growers, maybe they seem a little bit difficult to obtain, or maybe on the more expensive side of things for such small plants. They might be viewed as a little bit sensitive, or they're quite unfamiliar to most of us when we compare them to our usual epiphytic or semi-terrestrial orchids. And then on the other end of the spectrum, for houseplant growers, maybe they are put in the too hard basket because they haven't done well with orchids in the past, or they're scared off by certain requirements like humidity, which I'm going to get to. For me, I think that these guys act more like true terrestrials. I think their care is a little bit more similar to houseplants than typical orchids. Their growth habit too, I feel from my very short experience with them, is a little bit faster than the average orchid, and apparently propagating them is a lot more like houseplants as well. So I have seen the Ludisia discolor be propagated by stem cuttings. I'm not sure about the others. So without further ado, let's jump in and have a look at these guys. So I've got 10 jewel orchids, but 3 of them are doubles. But you might be able to see some general similarity between them. Now, they all have this velvety kind of green to very dark green leaf, and then they've got this almost iridescent green, white or red veining. And it's really impossible to show this on camera, but the veins do sparkle. And as soon as I get my lights on it, it reflects off these crystalline veins, and it looks like there's electricity coursing through these plants. They really earned the name of lightning orchids, which I think is actually specific to the Macodes petola, but I think you'll agree that it's the foliage that really sings on these plants. And the texture of these leaves is really soft and velvety as well. So seriously guys, I am just obsessed with these plants. I am totally hooked. They all do flower as well. They all flower from the tops of their growths, like the apex, but the flowers are fairly small and insignificant, and I don't think they're particularly long lasting either. The Ludisias apparently flower seasonally in winter, but obviously these ones aren't in flower. They both came to me from eBay by mail, and I have to say, out of all of the jewel orchids, the Ludisias travelled the worst. These were both pretty sad looking and limp when they came to me, but this one that I'm holding, the small one in particular, was in a really sorry state. It was in a super heavy mix with lots of sand, and there were no real roots to speak of. The newest growth had snapped off, off. This bigger one here was also limp, but it perked up again pretty quickly after I soaked it. And you can see it's not looking as sad now, and it's actually bringing out a new leaf there. So yeah, I hope this smaller one does bring out a new direction of growth, because I actually really like the foliage on it. But you can see what I've done here. I've kind of laid the rhizome on top of the media, and I've just secured it with a little twisty tie. When I got this plant, there was actually 2 inches of rhizome that was buried inside the pot, and it had rotted off and snapped off the main part of the plant. So I don't know, that just gives me a feeling that these rhizomes aren't meant to be buried, but let me know your experiences down below. Like, I feel like these rhizomes are just meant to walk almost along the surface of your media. The Orchid Species website says that these guys grow in Southeast Asia. They're hot to warm growers, and they're terrestrial or lithophytic, which fits in with most of the information out there. It's pretty funny. Their description says that it's got dark green leaves crisscrossed with red lateral lines, which makes them quite appealing even when not in bloom, which is interesting, but not fantastic. Anyhow, I politely disagree. I think they are fantastic, and you can see that even between the Ludisias there is a little bit of variation in the leaf patterns, and they all have these individual sort of leaf signatures. So I really hope this small one does grow out, because I think that it's got a bit more branching at the tip of the leaf, and it just looks really, really pretty. So this big Ludisia discolor has 3 growths, and you can see it sort of has a little bit of a rambling growth habit. It's got several growths that are separated by a rhizome, and as it grows it just unfurls new leaves from the apex of the crown of that growth, and I think it'll grow several growths and then it'll bloom from the tip once the blooming season starts. I think of all the jewel orchids, the Ludisia discolors are probably the most common and maybe the most affordable as well, so they're a pretty good place to start. Most people have a lot of success with them. I obviously had ones that battled through shipping a little bit, so they're both kind of recovering, but that big one is chucking out some new leaves, so I'm pretty happy with it. I'd just be careful. I've seen them in Australia at least for sale for quite high prices. I don't think that you necessarily have to spend a lot of money on these guys. I have seen them around at nurseries before for a reasonable price, but I'm only speaking for Australia. I'm not sure what the case is in other countries. Anyhow, I do hear that these guys are fairly easy to grow, and I also hear that they're quite fast growers, so I suppose they're going to be a fairly good entry plant into the jewel orchid world, even though mine have not gotten off to the best start. So I think if you can get them at a decent price, Ludisias are a really good place to start. And honestly, just look at them. They've got this amazing dark green, almost black foliage, which contrasts against that red veining, and they just look really striking. So now I'm going to show you my Macodes types. So with the Ludisia, I'm pretty sure there's only one species in that genus, the Ludisia discolor. But with Macodes, I think there's around 11 species discovered so far, and each of those species stays quite endemic to certain areas within Southeast Asia. So this is Macodes petola. I've got 2 of them, and you can see they're quite small, but look at the veinings. So Macodes petola is probably the most famous of the genus, and I think you can see why. This veining just kind of looks like lightning, and it honestly just glows. Both of these plants are throwing out new leaves at the moment. This is actually the second leaf in my care that this little one is working on as well. Now this smaller one I got off a website called orchidjewels.com.au. It's obviously just for Australian viewers, but I'd had a chat with the owner of the website, Jody, and it turns out she actually watches my YouTube channel, so she has kindly given me a discount code which I'll put in the description and I'll talk about at the end of the video. Now this larger one I got off eBay, and it was actually sold to me as a dark form. You can see the leaves are darker, but I'm not entirely convinced it's a form. It may be related to lighting as well, and the only way we're really going to know is over time as we grow these plants out, but it is really nice. with the contrasting dark leaves, and the veins just have a slightly sort of blushed tinge to them, I feel. Anyhow, again, I think you can see that they both have their own individual little leaf signatures, and I do just get the feeling that these guys are going to grow quite quickly in the right conditions. So again, these guys are understory terrestrial plants, and according to orchid species, they are found in low elevation montane forests in the Philippines and Indonesia, and they are warm to hot growers. The second most common Macodes you'll probably find is the Macodes sanderiana, and it does look similar to the petola, but from what I can see, the leaves are a little bit rounder and broader. And after googling a few images, it does seem quite common for them to have this little white border around the leaf edge, and it also has like a slight ruffling almost of the leaf edges. Now the veining on these are really interesting because at some angles it looks a little bit more red, and then at other times the veining's a little bit more gold. So this variety is found in PNG, Vanuatu, the Solomon Islands. It's another quite low elevation plant, and the one I'm holding here is from eBay. You can see it's just got the 2 leaves there, and this other one is from Jody from orchidjewels.com.au, and you can see that the newest leaf is actually slightly darker, and it has slightly more red veining than the rest of the leaves. So I'm not sure if that's going to fade out a little bit over time at all, but it is actually bringing out a new leaf there. In fact, I think every single one of my jewel orchids, except for that Ludisia discolor, is bringing out a leaf. Even see that little sanderiana? I've just had a look and it's actually bringing out a new little leaf in the center there as well. So that's super encouraging. My last Macodes is this Macodes limii, and I must say this has to be one of the most striking contrasts in my collection. It is just such a beautiful plant. You can see that the leaves on this Macodes are darker, and the contrasting that it provides with like that rose gold sort of blushed veining it's just spectacular, and I absolutely love it. Now there really isn't a huge amount of information online about this plant. It sounds like it's endemic to one area in Borneo, according to orchidspecies.com. And honestly, I think I'm actually really lucky to have this one because I haven't actually seen it around anywhere else. And as I mentioned, I think it's probably one of my favorite contrasts in terms of the leaf and the veining colors. Next up, we've got my Aspidogene argentea. Honestly, I have no idea if I am saying that correctly, but I'm going to stick with Aspidogene, and these guys are actually from Central and South America, with about 50 species recognized within the genus. So you can see it looks a little bit different to the Asian jewel orchids that we were looking at, but it's got this beautiful thick silver stripe down the middle of the leaf split, and it just contrasts really nicely with little silver veining around the edges on a nice green leaf. Now there is seriously barely any information about this orchid out there. Orchidspecies.com has this listed as a cool growing terrestrial, growing at sea level to 500 meters. So I'm not sure how that works. Like, I would have thought in Central America 500 meters would be pretty warm still, and I'm certainly not going to be chucking this little one outside to winter on my back deck anytime soon. Having said that, the picture on orchidspecies.com of the Aspidogene argentea is actually of a different looking plant, so I'm not sure what's correct. Google also brings up mixed images for this plant, so I don't know. Anyway, I'm very glad I got this one from Jody. It's a very, very cute little specimen. Next, we are back in Asia with the Anoectochilus. I think that's how you say it. There's around 50 species in this genus as well, and this one here is the Anoectochilus formosanus, and these guys actually have quite cute flowers compared to the others. So I'll attach a picture if I can, and the foliage on these Anoectochilus tend to be a little bit darker, just from the images that I've seen on Google. Anyhow, This one in particular has the most velvety leaves out of the whole lot. It seriously feels like very soft velvet and I can't stop touching it. The only other real information I've found on it is that it grows on shady forest floors at moderate elevations. And finally we've got my one and only hybrid. This is Ludisia discolor crossed with Anoectochilus siamensis. And this is some seriously cracking foliage. Look at how beautiful that is. It's so intricate and I don't know, it's just like quite a dense veining compared to the actual leaf size. Like you can see the limii here and that's got quite a dense patterning, but this is just something else. It's really, really pretty, and honestly the camera has just done none of these plants justice, but I think you can see how beautiful this foliage is. You can see this one as well is growing a new little leaf in the center there. So, you know, overall I think they're doing very well. Even though it's winter, they're still fairly vigorous. They're all actively growing new leaves. So I feel like they are liking the conditions I have them in currently. So on that note, let me summarize what very little I know about their care at the moment, and let me reiterate, I got my first jewel orchid about 2 months ago. All the jewel orchids are living in my Phalaenopsis grow space, which is supported by this Mars Hydro LED light. You can see that it is quite bright and it penetrates all the way down to the bottom there. I do usually have some blowpole lights as well, which aren't on. But you can see that the jewel orchids are on that third shelf, so quite a few feet away from the light source, but you can see it's still pretty bright. So I would say these guys like similar levels of light to the Phalaenopsis, which is bright shade. They're both sort of considered low light plants, but I really disagree with the term low light. I think LEDs are perfect because they just don't like hot direct light. Like the phals, they might do well next to a little bit of an eastern window, just getting a little bit of very early morning light. But be careful because these guys do have very fragile, thin sort of leaves, especially compared to Phalaenopsis, which are pretty much like succulent sort of leaves. So they're really not going to enjoy any sort of direct hot sun at all. So I'd be very careful about putting them in any direct light, but definitely bright shade, and so I think LEDs will work perfectly for them. In terms of watering, I would say keep these guys fairly evenly moist. I'm keeping them similar to how I would keep my Mortier Paphiopedilums, so just watering as soon as that top layer starts to go dry. I will water them again. The key to keeping any sort of orchid evenly moist is well draining media. That way you can actually water as frequently as you want. It's not going to keep the roots soggy. Alright guys, let's talk about humidity. Yes, humidity is important. All tropical plants that we grow inside the house would probably prefer a much higher humidity than they get. You guys also know that I do not adjust my humidity at all. Down in my fowl grow space, my humidity is 67% today. It has been a little bit rainy here and there though, but this is pretty average for my winter. It ranges from about 50 to 70% throughout the year. However, we do get low humidity, and even though throughout the year my humidity is fairly reasonable, sitting around the 60% mark, I'd say is pretty average. We do definitely have dry, windy sort of days now and again. Last summer was probably one of the worst low humidity periods I've experienced in Brisbane, hence why we had all those bushfires, I suppose. So next summer, if we do end up with another dry season like that, maybe I will consider modifying my humidity a little bit, because it was really, really hard work, and I do think that if these little guys dry out and dry out for a few days straight, I think that could really be the end of them. So I think that would be the most sensitive care requirement. In winter it's obviously a lot easier to keep up with watering. There's less evaporation because it's cooler, but yeah, definitely I think in summer I'll have to keep an eye on them, and I might even put them into self-watering in spring. Last summer I also modified my watering in the end to leave a little bit of a reservoir in pretty much all my orchid pots. So I'll either put this into self-watering, or even if I keep a little reservoir, that actually creates quite a bit of humidity in itself. I am actually getting sponsored a grow tent and artificial spider farmer light in a couple of weeks, so I might actually experiment a little bit and separate out a couple of these plants and make the grow tent a bit of a humidity experiment. So that might be interesting to see if humidity does actually make a big difference in the growth of these orchids. In terms of temperature, these guys are generally low altitude thermophilic plants. This means they don't like to get too cold, so I've got mine on heat mats. Whether that's really required, I don't know, but they seem to like it and they seem to be growing, so I'm just going to stick with it. Along with all that, don't forget about airflow, especially if you are doing things to raise your humidity. The last thing is media. So the ones that already came potted, a lot of the ones from eBay came in sphagnum and perlite, and then the ones from Jody from orchidjewels.com.au came in like a peat sort of mix, I think. So I have kept them mostly in the medium that they came in and just filled around with a mix of sphagnum and bark. For the ones that I potted up completely, so that is the Ludisia discolors, I pretty much used half and half of this indoor peat based potting mix and half of my usual bark premix, which contains bark, perlite and charcoal, and I think I added like a few more handfuls of perlite to boot. Now the last thing is that you'll notice that I have made a concerted effort not to bury the rhizomes. Now these little jewel orchids don't have much of that, but this jewel orchid, you'll remember me saying that it had like 2 inches of buried rhizome that had completely rotted off. So that just made me sort of think that I kind of imagine these guys rambling along the forest floor, like crawling and then rooting into the ground, but their rhizomes staying above the ground. Now I don't know if that's true. It seems reasonable based on my full, 6 weeks worth of expertise, but I'd really like to know what you guys do in terms of potting your jewel orchids as well. In terms of where to get these guys, I've seen them around now, in Australia you can get them off eBay. There's a few nurseries around that sell them. What I guess the struggle is getting them at a reasonable price. So the Ludisias are definitely probably the easiest to get your hands on. Now and again you'll see them for sale for, $25 at various nurseries or on Marketplace. I almost never get good deals on eBay anymore. eBay, honestly, I think it just exists in its own little economy bubble. So compared to bidding, I much prefer to have a set price for orchids. So if you're in Australia, check out Jodie's site, orchidjewels.com.au, and if something catches your eye, put in ORCHID 10 at the checkout for 10% off. I'm not getting any kickbacks at all from this. Jodie's just one of the gang here and she watches my channel, so it's nice to give back. But I think most importantly, the plants that came from her were reasonably priced. They are very healthy and transported well. So check her out if you're in Australia. Anyway guys, I hope you liked this video. Please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more orchid videos and hear about my jewel orchid updates. I hope you guys have a fantastic week and happy growing until I see you next time. Bye!